The photograph slipped from her trembling fingers and landed face up on the polished marble, a laughing baby boy with eyes that mirrored the billionaire's own. Alexander Wolf froze, his empire of steel and shadows cracking open as he stared at the impossible truth. The exhausted waitress crumpled in his arms knew his darkest secret, one he never knew existed. A son. His son. Born from a night that should have meant nothing and now meant everything. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let me tell you how a single moment shattered two lives and rebuilt them into something neither dared imagine. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurelius, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants where a single reservation required connections money couldn't buy and a wait list that stretched 6 months deep. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across tables draped in imported Italian linen, while servers moved like choreographed dancers between patrons who wore their wealth as casually as others wore cotton. Evelyn Carter barely noticed the opulence anymore. It had stopped impressing her somewhere around month 3 of her employment, right about when the exhaustion became a constant companion rather than an occasional visitor. She carried a tray of champagne flutes with the mechanical precision of someone running on fumes and muscle memory, her smile fixed in place like a mask she couldn't quite remove, even when her face ached from holding it. 23 years old, and she felt ancient, felt hollowed out, felt like she was disappearing one shift at a time. "Miss," a voice cut through her fog. "Miss, I asked for Veuve Clicquot, not Dom Perignon." Evelyn blinked, focusing on the woman dripping in diamonds and disdain. "I apologize. I'll correct that immediately." She retreated before the woman could elaborate on her displeasure, her feet screaming in shoes that had worn through at the heel 2 weeks ago. New ones cost money she didn't have. Everything cost money she didn't have. The electric bill, the rent, the daycare fees that climbed higher every month while her tips stayed frustratingly flat. And Ethan, always Ethan. Her beautiful boy with his gap-toothed smile and those eyes, those impossibly green eyes that she saw every time she closed her own. "Carter, table 12 needs attention." Marcus, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow with his usual expression of mild irritation. "And you look half dead. Pull it together or go home." "I'm fine," she lied, the words automatic. She was never fine. Fine was a country she'd emigrated from 3 years ago and couldn't afford a return ticket to. Table 12 sat near the back, partially obscured by an ornamental screen that provided an illusion of privacy. She approached with her professional smile locked in place, her order pad ready, and stopped short when she actually looked at the man seated there, Alexander Wolf. She recognized him the way everyone in New York recognized him, from photographs in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, from gossip columns that speculated endlessly about his personal life, from news segments about his latest acquisition or corporate maneuver. 42 years old and worth more than some small nations, cold, calculating, untouchable, and staring directly at her with eyes the color of Arctic ice. "Good evening, Mr. Wolf." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Can I get you anything?" "McAllen 25. Neat?" His voice matched his reputation, smooth, controlled, and completely devoid of warmth. "And water, still, not sparkling." "Right away, sir." She turned to leave and the room tilted. Just slightly, just enough that she had to touch the wall to steady herself, her vision graying at the edges like an old photograph fading in sunlight. When had she last eaten? Breakfast? No. Yesterday's lunch, maybe. A granola bar eaten standing up while Ethan napped. "Are you unwell?" The question came from behind her, sharp and immediate. She straightened, forcing steel into her spine that she didn't possess. "I'm fine. One moment." The walk to the bar felt like miles. She placed the order with Jeremy, the bartender, and gripped the polished wood surface while black spots danced across her vision like insects. "You good, Ev?" Jeremy's face swam into focus, creased with concern. "You look—" "I'm fine," she repeated, the lie wearing thinner each time. "Just tired." "You're always tired." He poured the whiskey with practiced ease, the amber liquid catching the light. "When's the last time you had a day off?" She couldn't remember. Days blurred together in an endless cycle of work, sleep, Ethan, repeat. The daycare teacher had mentioned that Ethan asked where Mommy was all the time now. The words had carved themselves into her chest and taken up permanent residence there, a guilt that throbbed with every heartbeat. Here, Jeremy slid the drinks toward her. And for the love of everything, eat something before you pass out. After this table, she lifted the tray and made her way back through the restaurant, past conversations about vacation homes and stock portfolios, past problems that money could solve with the stroke of a pen. Alexander Wolf hadn't moved. He sat with the absolute stillness of a predator conserving energy, his attention fixed on his phone until she approached. "You're McAllen, sir." She placed the glass with care, followed by the water. "Can I bring you anything else?" His eyes lifted to hers, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered in their frozen depths. Not warmth, not quite, but recognition of some kind, acknowledgement that she existed beyond her function. "No, thank you." She nodded and retreated, grateful to escape that piercing gaze. 3 more hours. She could survive 3 more hours. Then home to Mrs. Chen's apartment to collect Ethan, carry his sleeping weight up 2 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again, tuck him into the bed they shared in their single room, and collapse until her alarm shrieked at 5:30 and the whole cycle began again. The night ground forward with the relentless quality of machinery. Orders taken and delivered, smiles manufactured and deployed. Tips counted and recounted because every dollar mattered. Every penny meant the difference between making rent and explaining to a 3-year-old why they had to move again. "Carter," Marcus materialized at her shoulder, his voice tight with forced pleasantness. "Mr. Wolf has requested you specifically for the remainder of his meal." Her stomach dropped. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me. Don't screw this up. He tips well when he's satisfied." She returned to table 12 with dread settling in her bones. Alexander Wolf had barely touched his whiskey, his attention now divided between his phone and a slim leather portfolio open on the table. "You asked for me, sir?" "I did." He didn't look up. "You're efficient. I prefer consistency." It wasn't a compliment, just an observation delivered without inflection. She should have felt relieved. Some wealthy men requested specific servers for far less professional reasons. But something about his absolute control, his complete lack of visible emotion, unsettled her more than aggression would have. "I'll be happy to assist you this evening." "Good." He finally looked at her, and that strange flicker of recognition appeared again. "What's your name?" "Evelyn, sir." "Evelyn." He tested the word like he was evaluating its worth. "How long have you worked here?" The question caught her off guard. Patrons rarely ask personal questions beyond the performative. 8 months. "You look exhausted." The blunt observation hit harder than criticism. She opened her mouth to deliver another lie, but the words stuck in her throat. He wasn't being cruel, wasn't commenting with malice. He stated facts the way someone might observe the weather. "I'm managing," she said finally. "That's not what I asked." "It's all I have to offer, sir." Something crossed his face then, too quick to identify, gone before she could analyze it. He closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. "I'll have the chef's tasting menu, all courses." "Excellent choice. Any dietary restrictions?" "No." She noted the order and escaped, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. There was something about him, about the way he looked at her like he could see straight through her practiced composure to the desperation underneath. That made her feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in a way she couldn't afford to be. The kitchen moved with controlled chaos, chefs calling orders while servers wove between stations. Evelyn leaned against the wall in a quiet corner, pressing her palms against the cool tile and counting her breaths. 4 more hours now. The tasting menu would take time. "You really do look like hell," Sarah, another server, commented as she passed with a loaded tray. "No offense. None taken. When's your next day off?" "Thursday." Maybe, if Marcus approved it, if she could afford to lose the shift. "You should actually rest on it instead of picking up extra hours." Evelyn smiled without humor. "I'll take that under advisement." The first course emerged from the kitchen, an architectural masterpiece of seared scallop perched on black garlic puree. She delivered it to table 12, where Alexander Wolf accepted it with a slight nod and no other acknowledgement. She watched him taste it, a single bite taken with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else. before turning away. The night continued its inexorable march. Second course. Third, each delivered and cleared with professional efficiency while her body screamed for rest. The dining room began to empty as the evening wore into night, early diners replaced by late arrivals, until finally the crowd thinned to a scattered handful. Table 12 remained occupied. Alexander Wolf worked through his meal with methodical attention, occasionally making notes in his portfolio between courses. He made one phone call, his voice low and clipped, discussing quarterly projections and board meetings with someone who apparently made the mistake of disappointing him. Evelyn caught fragments as she passed, enough to confirm what everyone already knew. He was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely alone by choice. Final course, sir. She placed the dessert, a delicate construction of dark chocolate and gold leaf, before him. Can I get you anything else? Coffee, black. She returned with the coffee and stood a respectful distance away while he finished his meal. The restaurant had quieted now, most tables cleared, the usual end-of-night energy settling over the staff. Freedom so close she could taste it. And then the floor tilted again. This time, there was no wall to catch herself on, no surface to grip. Her vision didn't just gray, it whited out completely, a blank page where reality should have been. She felt herself falling, felt gravity claim her the way it had been threatening to all night, felt the inevitability of impact approaching. Strong arms caught her before she hit the marble, caught her and held her with surprising steadiness, with a grip that felt solid and real in a world that had stopped making sense. She tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but her body had decided it was done accepting commands. Call an ambulance. Alexander Wolf's voice cut through the sudden commotion, sharp with authority. No. The words scraped out of her throat. No ambulance. Can't afford. That's not your concern right now. Please. She forced her eyes open, forced focus into her vision until his face sharpened into clarity. Please. I can't. The bill. I can't pay. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening. Not exactly, but a recalculation happening behind those ice-chip eyes. My office. Now. He looked at someone over her shoulder. Marcus probably, judging by the nervous stammering that followed. Where's your private office? Second floor. But sir, I don't care what you think. Get her somewhere private. Now. The world moved in fragments after that, being carried, actually carried, through the restaurant while concerned faces blurred past. The sensation of climbing stairs, a door opening, the soft give of a leather couch beneath her as she was laid down with surprising care. Water. Alexander's voice again, still commanding. And food. Whatever's available. Move. She tried to sit up and a firm hand pressed her shoulder back down. Don't. I need to. Ethan, Mrs. Chen, you need to stay still until you can stand without collapsing. His face appeared above hers, closer now, and she realized with distant surprise that his eyes weren't entirely cold. Something burned in their depths, something that looked almost like concern. Who's Ethan? My son. The words escaped before she could stop them, carried on a wave of panic. He's at the sitters. I need to get him. You need to breathe and let your blood pressure normalize. You don't understand. I understand you're going to hurt yourself if you keep trying to move. So lie still and be quiet. It wasn't a suggestion. She subsided against the cushions, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now. Marcus appeared with a bottle of water and a plate of bread and cheese from the kitchen. Alexander took them without a word and dismissed him with a look that could cut glass. Drink. He pressed the water into her hands. Small sips. She obeyed because arguing required energy she didn't have. The water tasted like salvation, cool and clean sliding down her parched throat. When had she last had water? The break room sink at lunch? No. Earlier. Maybe. Now eat. That wasn't a request. She took the bread with shaking hands and forced herself to bite, to chew, to swallow past the knot of anxiety lodged in her chest. The simple carbohydrates hit her empty stomach, and her body practically wept with gratitude. Better? Alexander watched her with the intensity of a scientist observing an experiment, not unkind, not warm, just utterly focused. Yes, thank you. She set the water aside and tried again to sit up, This time he didn't stop her. I should go. Mrs. Chen will be wondering, in a moment. He settled into the chair across from her, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. How long since you've eaten a proper meal? I eat. That's not what I asked. Heat crawled up her neck. Yesterday, lunch. That's 30 hours ago. I'm aware of basic mathematics. A ghost of something crossed his face, amusement maybe, or surprise that she'd snapped back. When's your last day off? That's none of your business. You collapsed in my presence. That makes it my business. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion weighted her limbs like lead. 3 weeks, maybe 4. You're killing yourself. I'm surviving. The words came out sharper than intended. Which is what people do when they don't have billions in the bank to cushion every decision. Silence followed her outburst. Alexander Wolf studied her with those unsettling eyes, and she waited for him to have her fired, to call security, to do what powerful men did when challenged by people who didn't matter. Instead, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a wallet. No. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying only slightly. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's payment for services rendered and a tip for exceptional service under difficult circumstances. He extracted several bills, hundreds, she realized with a jolt, and set them on the table between them. Take it. I can't. You have a son who needs you functional, not martyred. Take the money and use it to take care of yourself so you can take care of him. The logic was infuriatingly sound. The money represented 2 weeks of tips. 3, maybe. Enough to catch up on the electric bill and buy Ethan new shoes because he'd outgrown his current pair and she'd been padding them with extra socks to make them last. Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. She took the money with fingers that trembled slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't collapse in public again. It's inefficient. Almost a joke. Almost warmth. She might have smiled if she weren't so tired. I should go. She moved toward the door, still unsteady but functional. Mrs. Chen really will be worried. Wait! She turned back. Alexander had stood, his considerable height suddenly apparent in the small office. He moved with the fluid grace of someone utterly comfortable in his own skin, someone who had never questioned his right to occupy space. How are you getting home? Subway. At this hour? Alone? It's fine. I do it every night. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's appallingly unsafe. That's reality for people without drivers. I'll take you. The offer stunned her into silence. Alexander Wolf, the Alexander Wolf, was offering to drive her home, to her cramped studio in a building that should have been condemned 5 years ago, to a neighborhood where his car would be the most valuable thing for 3 blocks in any direction. That's not necessary. Nevertheless, I can't accept. You can argue or you can get to your son faster. Choose. She chose. 20 minutes later, she found herself in the back of a town car that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years, watching Manhattan slide past the tinted windows while Alexander Wolf sat beside her in silence. The driver, an older man who handled the vehicle with professional ease, didn't comment on their destination when she provided the address. If he judged the neighborhood, his face didn't betray it. The car glided through streets that grew progressively rougher, past bodegas with barred windows and buildings wearing their decay like scars. Here, she said finally, indicating a brick structure that sagged with exhaustion matching her own. The car stopped. Alexander surveyed the building with an expression she couldn't read. You live here? Yes. With your son? Yes. Alone? The question felt loaded with implications she didn't want to examine. His father isn't in the picture. By choice? By reality. She reached for the door handle. Thank you for the ride. And the money. And everything. Evelyn. She looked back. In the dim light of the car's interior, Alexander's face had softened almost imperceptibly. Or maybe she was imagining it. Maybe exhaustion was painting warmth where only clinical detachment existed. Take care of yourself, he said quietly. That child needs you. Something in her chest cracked open. Not breaking, but shifting. Acknowledgement from a stranger that her existence mattered, that her survival wasn't just important to her, that she was seen. I will. Thank you. She climbed out into the night air, cool and sharp with the promise of autumn. The car remained at the curb until she'd entered the building, until she'd climbed the stairs and knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. Only after the elderly woman had handed over a sleeping Ethan, after Evelyn had hiked up one more flight to her own apartment, did she hear the car pull away. Ethan barely stirred as she changed him into pajamas and tucked him into their shared bed. She stood over him for a long moment, studying the face that owned her heart completely. His dark hair fell across his forehead in sleep-tangled waves. His chest rose and fell with the perfect rhythm of childhood dreams, and his eyes, closed now but burned into her memory, were the exact shade of green as Alexander Wolf's. The photograph. She'd forgotten about the photograph she carried everywhere, tucked in her apron pocket where she could touch it during her breaks. The photo of Ethan laughing at the park last summer, his eyes bright with joy, his smile wide enough to crack the world open. She checked her apron and found it empty. Searched her purse, the pockets of her jacket. Nothing. It must have fallen out at the restaurant, probably during her collapse, probably scattered across that expensive marble floor for anyone to find. For Alexander to find. Her blood ran cold. But no, he couldn't have. He would have said something, would have asked. Would have what? Connected a 3-year-old boy's eyes to his own? Recognized his own genetics in a stranger's child? The thought was absurd, paranoid, impossible. Except those eyes were unmistakable. Except she remembered the night Ethan was conceived with perfect clarity. A hotel bar after her shift. A man whose face she'd recognized from the news. Conversation that felt like lightning in a bottle. Chemistry that defied logic. And a single night that changed everything. She hadn't known his name then. Had only learned it later when his picture appeared in a magazine article and her heart stopped beating for several long seconds. By then she was 3 months pregnant and he was a billion miles away, living in a world she couldn't access even if she'd wanted to. And she hadn't wanted to. Hadn't wanted to be that woman, the one who showed up with a baby and demands. Hadn't wanted to see the disgust or the checkbook or the lawyers who would make her disappear along with her inconvenient truth. So she disappeared herself. Built a life in the shadows of his empire, survived, until tonight, until the moment their worlds had collided and she'd ended up in his arms, carried through his domain, watched with those eyes that didn't know they'd looked at their son 1,000 times. Evelyn sank onto the bed beside Ethan and pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing the sob that tried to escape. She was being irrational, paranoid. He didn't know, couldn't know. One lost photograph meant nothing, except it meant everything. She curled around her son and buried her face in his hair, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "I've got you," she whispered, "always, no matter what." But as sleep finally claimed her, dragging her down into dreams that felt more like premonitions, one thought circled endlessly through her exhausted mind. Those eyes. Those unmistakable, impossible eyes. And the man who owned them, who'd held her while she fell apart, who'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. Alexander Wolf didn't leave puzzles unsolved, and Evelyn had just become the most interesting problem he'd encountered in years. The photograph lay on Alexander's desk like an accusation. He'd found it that night, after the car had returned from dropping Evelyn at that condemned building she called home. It had been wedged against the baseboard near where she'd collapsed, slightly crumpled, but intact. He'd picked it up intending to set it aside for lost and found, then made the mistake of actually looking at it. The child couldn't have been more than 3. Dark hair, gap-toothed grin, chubby hands clutching what looked like a dandelion. And eyes that stopped Alexander's breath in his chest, because he'd seen them every morning in his mirror for 42 years. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of staring at this photograph between conference calls and board meetings. 3 days of telling himself he was seeing patterns where none existed, that green eyes were common enough, that his mind was manufacturing connections because the alternative, the impossible alternative, was too absurd to consider. Except he couldn't stop considering it. "Mr. Wolf?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock is here." He pressed the button without taking his eyes off the photograph. "Cancel it." "Sir, it's the Meridian acquisition. They flew in from Tokyo to reschedule everything. Clear my afternoon. Silence greeted this unprecedented request. Alexander Wolf didn't cancel meetings, didn't reschedule acquisitions, didn't let anything interrupt the machinery of empire building that had consumed his adult life. Of course, sir. Should I? And get me everything you can find on an Evelyn Carter. Works at Aurelius. Started 8 months ago. Another pause, shorter this time. Right away, sir. He severed the connection and returned his attention to the photograph. The child, Ethan, she'd said his name was Ethan, beamed up at him with uncomplicated joy. The kind of joy Alexander couldn't remember ever possessing. The kind that came from not knowing the world was designed to disappoint you. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard, his corporate attorney and closest thing to a friend. Lunch tomorrow? Need to discuss the Singapore contracts. Alexander typed back with one hand while the other traced the edge of the photograph. Can't. Something came up. 3 dots appeared immediately. Richard wasn't used to being declined. Everything all right? You never cancel. Fine. Just busy. He set the phone aside before Richard could press further. The truth was he didn't know if everything was all right, didn't know what he was doing or why he couldn't let this go. A reasonable man would have filed the photograph away and forgotten about it, would have dismissed the coincidence as just that, coincidence. Alexander had built an empire on being reasonable, on calculating risks and eliminating variables, on controlling every aspect of his world with ruthless efficiency, and for the first time in decades he felt completely out of control. The background check arrived within the hour, compiled with the thoroughness only money could buy. Evelyn Marie Carter, 23 years old, born in Pennsylvania to parents who died in a car accident when she was 19. No siblings, no trust fund, no safety net of any kind. She'd moved to New York 4 years ago with nothing but student debt from 2 semesters of college she couldn't afford to finish. Employment history read like a catalog of survival, retail, food service, housekeeping. Never staying anywhere long enough to build seniority. Always one crisis away from homelessness. The kind of existence Alexander understood intellectually, but had never experienced viscerally. No mention of the child's father. No marriage certificate. No birth certificate attached to the preliminary report, though that could be obtained with the right pressure applied to the right departments. He should stop. Should respect her privacy and move on with his life. Should accept that this woman and her child were none of his business. Instead, he picked up his phone and called his driver. David, I need an address surveilled, discreetly. The building looked worse in daylight. Alexander sat in the back of his car 3 blocks away, watching the entrance through tinted windows while David maintained the engine at idle. Rain had started again, turning the cracked sidewalk into a minefield of puddles that reflected the gray sky like broken mirrors. Sir, David said carefully, if I may ask, what exactly are we doing? Waiting. For what? Alexander didn't answer because he didn't have one. What was he waiting for? A glimpse of the child? Confirmation of the impossible? Some sign that would make this gnawing certainty in his gut make sense? Movement at the building's entrance caught his attention. Evelyn emerged with Ethan balanced on her hip, his small arms wrapped around her neck. She wore jeans and a jacket too thin for the weather, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look even younger than 23. The child, his face visible now in profile, chattered at her with animated enthusiasm, his hands gesturing wildly. Alexander's chest constricted. The eyes. Even from this distance, even in the gray light, he could see them. Could see himself staring back from a face too young to understand what those eyes meant. Follow them, he said quietly. Stay back. Don't let her see us. David pulled into traffic with the smooth competence of someone who'd done this before. They maintained 3 car lengths back as Evelyn walked toward the subway entrance, Ethan now on her shoulders, his laughter audible even through the rain. She stopped at a bodega, emerged with a small bag, and continued on while sharing what looked like a muffin with her son. At the daycare, a converted brownstone with cheerful murals peeling in the weather, she crouched to Ethan's level for a long conversation. Alexander couldn't hear the words, but he saw the way she cupped the child's face, the way she kissed his forehead, the way she lingered even after the teacher came to collect him. Saw the way she stood outside the door for a full minute after he'd gone inside, her hand pressed flat against the glass. Christ, David muttered. She's just a kid herself. She's 23. Like I said, a kid. Alexander said nothing. He watched Evelyn check her phone, watched her shoulders slump slightly before she straightened them with visible effort and headed for the subway. Watched her disappear underground while rain continued to fall and questions continued to multiply in his mind. Back to the office, he said finally. Sir, I know. Alexander closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. I know how this looks. I'm handling it. Are you? The question hung in the air between them. David had been with him for 15 years, had earned the right to occasionally speak freely. Alexander chose to ignore the privilege this time. The office. Now. His phone rang before they'd gone 2 blocks. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Alexander considered declining, then accepted with a sigh. What? Lovely to hear your voice, too. Richard's dry tone carried through the speaker. I'm calling because I'm worried about you. Don't be. You canceled a $100 million acquisition meeting without explanation. That's not like you. I had something more important to handle. More important than... Richard stopped. Are you sick? Is it health? Because if you need time, I'm not sick. Then what? Alexander watched the city slide past his window, all concrete and glass and people rushing through their lives with purpose. I found something. Someone. It's complicated. Complicated how? I can't explain yet. Alex. Richard's voice softened, using the nickname only he was permitted. Talk to me. What's going on? I think I have a son. The words escaped before he could stop them, stark and impossible in the quiet of the car. Silence followed, stretching long enough that Alexander checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. You think you have a what? A son, 3 years old. I saw his picture and... Alexander stopped, hearing how insane this sounded. His eyes, Richard. He has my eyes. Lots of people have green eyes. Not like these, exactly like mine. The exact shade, the exact shape. And the timing fits. 4 years ago, He stopped again. That night wasn't something he discussed. Wasn't something he thought about. Except now he couldn't stop thinking about it. There was a woman. One night. I didn't get her name. Jesus Christ. Richard exhaled heavily. Have you talked to her? To the mother? Not yet. Why the hell not? Because I don't know what to say. Alexander dragged a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. What do I say, Richard? Excuse me. I think that child you've been raising alone might be mine because we had a forgettable one-night stand 4 years ago. It wasn't forgettable, if you remember it. Fair point. Alexander remembered it with crystalline clarity. The hotel bar where he'd gone to escape a tedious charity gala, the young woman with sad eyes and a smile that felt genuine in a world of manufactured pleasantness. The conversation that somehow bypassed small talk and went straight to the truths people usually hid. The way she'd laughed at his cynicism and challenged his assumptions and made him feel, for one night, like something other than a walking profit margin. He'd woken alone the next morning, no note or number left behind. Had told himself it was better that way. Cleaner, less complicated. And now here he was, 4 years later, staring at a photograph of a child who might be the consequence of that one night of being recklessly human. I need you to be honest with me, Alexander said quietly. Am I losing my mind? Am I seeing something that isn't there because why? Because he was lonely? Because he'd built an empire of money and power that meant nothing at 3 in the morning when insomnia struck? Because some primitive part of him recognized genetic mirrors even when logic screamed impossible? I don't know, Richard admitted. But I do know you're the most rational person I've ever met. If you think there's a connection, there probably is. The question is what you're going to do about it. I don't know that either. We'll figure it out. And for the love of God, talk to her before you do anything else. Don't be the creepy stalker billionaire. That's not a good look on anyone. The call ended and Alexander sat in silence while the city continued its indifferent march. Richard was right. He needed to talk to Evelyn, needed to ask the questions burning holes in his rational mind, needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. But first, he needed more information. The birth certificate arrived that evening, obtained through channels he didn't examine too closely. Ethan James Carter, born at Mount Sinai Hospital on a cold January morning 3 years and 8 months ago. Mother, Evelyn Marie Carter. Father, unknown, unknown. The word mocked him from the official document. Unknown because she hadn't told anyone. Unknown because she'd chosen to raise this child alone rather than, what, come to him? Demand support? Complicate his carefully controlled existence? He should be grateful. Should appreciate that she hadn't shown up with lawyers and paternity tests and demands for millions. Should respect that she'd handled her situation with quiet dignity rather than making it his problem. Instead, he felt something uncomfortably close to anger, that she'd struggled alone, that she'd worked herself into collapse, that his son, his possible son, he amended, though the distinction felt increasingly hollow, had grown up in poverty while Alexander sat on billions he couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. His phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Wolf, this is Evelyn Carter. I believe I left something at the restaurant. A photograph. If it was found, could you please let me know? It's important to me. Alexander stared in the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. A dozen responses formed and dissolved. Finally, he typed, I have it. It's safe. I'd like to return it personally. Are you working tomorrow? The response came quickly. Evening shift, 5 p.m. Thank you. He set the phone down and looked at the photograph again, at the child who smiled at him with his own eyes. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he would return the picture and ask the questions that needed asking. Tomorrow he would learn the truth, whatever it cost him. Tomorrow his carefully controlled world might shatter completely. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Alexander found himself almost looking forward to it. The next evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Alexander sat in his office long after his staff had gone home, the photograph in his jacket pocket like a talisman, or a loaded gun, he couldn't decide which. At 4:30, he left the tower that bore his name and pointed David toward Aurelius. Evening traffic snarled the streets, giving him too much time to think, to question, to wonder if he was making a catastrophic mistake. Sir, David said as they crawled past Columbus Circle, whatever you're planning, be kind. She's been through enough. How do you know what she's been through? I have eyes, and I drove past that building she lives in. Nobody living there has had an easy time of anything. Alexander filed the observation away with all the others accumulating in his mind. Evidence of a life lived on the razor's edge of disaster. Evidence of strength he couldn't comprehend. Evidence that the world he'd built had no space for people like Evelyn Carter, who survived through will rather than wealth. Aurelius glittered in the early evening light, its windows golden with the promise of exclusivity. Alexander walked through the front entrance like he owned it, which, he realized with dark amusement, he technically did. He'd invested in the restaurant 3 years ago as part of a larger portfolio, had never paid attention to it beyond quarterly reports. Funny how the world contained so many things he owned without knowing, without caring. Marcus materialized instantly, his professional mask sliding into place. Mr. Wolf, we weren't expecting you this evening. Shall I prepare your usual table? No, I'm here to see Evelyn Carter. The mask slipped slightly. I'm sorry? Evelyn Carter, one of your servers. I need to speak with her. Of course, sir. Though she's currently working, I'll wait. He settled at a table near the back and ordered scotch he didn't want. The evening shift unfolded around him. The familiar ballet of service he'd observed 100 times without truly seeing. But now he watched for one specific performer, and when Evelyn finally appeared from the kitchen, his breath caught. She moved through the dining room with the same exhausted grace as before, her smile manufactured but her service impeccable. She didn't see him initially, too focused on her tables, on maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. When their eyes finally met across the crowded restaurant, she froze, just for a second, just long enough that the tray in her hands wavered before she steadied it. Alexander raised his glass slightly. An acknowledgement, an invitation. She finished with her current table before approaching his, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Wolf, I didn't expect to see you again. I have something that belongs to you. He withdrew the photograph and placed it on the table between them. Her hand flew to it immediately, clutching it like a lifeline. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by something more guarded. Thank you. I was worried. She stopped. Thank you. Sit down. I can't. I'm working. Evelyn, he kept his voice gentle, which took more effort than it should have. Please, sit down. We need to talk. About what? I think you know. The color drained from her face. She glanced around the restaurant, at the patrons absorbed in their meals and conversations, at Marcus hovering near the kitchen with his usual territorial concern. When she looked back at Alexander, her eyes held something he couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. I get a break at 6:30, she said quietly. 15 minutes. I'll be here. She nodded and retreated, the photograph disappearing into her apron pocket. Alexander watched her work for the next 40 minutes, watched her smile and serve and pretend nothing was wrong while her world tilted on its axis. He knew the feeling. At 6:30, she appeared at his table and jerked her head toward the back. This way. He followed her through the kitchen, ignoring the startled looks from staff, and into a narrow hallway that led to the service entrance. The alley beyond smelled of garbage and rain, but at least it was private. Evelyn leaned against the brick wall and crossed her arms. How long have you known? 3 days, since I found the photograph. And you're sure? Because lots of kids have green eyes, and if you're here to... I'm sure. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery, scrolling to a picture from his own childhood. 8 years old, gap-toothed, grinning at the camera with eyes that matched Ethan's exactly. He turned the screen toward her. Tell me I'm wrong. She looked at the image and her carefully constructed composure crumbled. Oh God. Is he mine, Evelyn? I can't. Her breath came faster, shallow with panic. You can't just show up and ask that. You can't just, is he mine? The question landed like a physical blow. She flinched, then straightened with visible effort. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. The word detonated in the space between them. Yes. Simple and devastating and completely expected, yet hearing it still felt like falling from a great height. Alexander gripped the railing beside him, needing something solid while reality rearranged itself. 4 years ago, Evelyn continued, words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. The hotel bar, the Rothmore. You were there after some event, and I was working banquet service, and we talked. And then we... She stopped, her face flushing. You don't remember. I remember. His voice came out rougher than intended. I remember everything about that night. Her eyes widened. You do? Every word, every moment. He stepped closer, watching her reactions carefully. You told me about your parents' accident, about trying to make it in a city that didn't care whether you lived or died. You asked me what it was like to have everything, and I told you it was empty. We talked for 3 hours. 3.5, she corrected automatically. And then I took you upstairs. And then you were gone in the morning. The words held no accusation, just statement of fact. No note, no number, nothing. I had a flight to London, a merger that couldn't wait. The excuse sounded hollow now. I looked for you afterward, but you'd already quit. The hotel wouldn't give me information. I quit because I found out I was pregnant and couldn't handle the stress. She laughed bitterly. Funny how things work out. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? I didn't even know your name until I saw your picture in a magazine 3 months later. By then I was showing and broke and living in a shelter. Her voice gained an edge. What was I supposed to do? Show up at your office with my swollen belly and beg? Wait outside your building, hoping you'd remember the girl you fucked one night? I have pride, Mr. Wolf. Not much else, but I have that. The crude language surprised him. Surprised and somehow pleased him because it meant she'd stopped being careful, stopped performing. You should have told me, he said quietly. I would have helped. Would you? Or would you have thrown money at the problem and made me sign an NDA? Would you have acknowledged him or paid me to disappear? She pushed off the wall, standing at her full height, which still left her a foot shorter than him. I did what I thought was right. I protected my son from being a complication in your perfect life, and nearly killed yourself in the process. But I survived. We survived. I gave him a home and food and love, which is more than money can buy. Money buys security. Alexander heard his voice rising and forced it down. Money buys health care and education and a future that doesn't involve watching your mother work herself into collapse. Money matters, Evelyn, whether you want to admit it or not. I know it matters. The words burst out of her, loud enough to echo in the alley. I know, okay? I know every single day that I'm failing him, that he deserves better than a studio apartment and secondhand clothes and a mother who's too tired to read him bedtime stories. I know I'm not enough, I've always known. But he's mine, and I love him, and I'm doing the best I can. Her voice broke on the last word. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she swiped at them angrily, like they were a weakness she couldn't afford. Alexander moved without thinking, closing the distance between them. You're not failing him. You're keeping him alive and loved. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. Then let me help. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and searching. Why? Because of guilt? Because you feel obligated? Because he's my son. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign and right all at once. Because I have resources you need. Because... He stopped, grappling with emotions he didn't have names for. Because I want to know him. I want to know both of you. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its defensive edge. He asks about his father sometimes, where he is, why he doesn't visit. I tell him his daddy loves him but can't be here right now. She met Alexander's eyes. What do I tell him now? That his daddy is a billionaire who didn't know he existed? That he has enough money to buy him everything but didn't even know his name until 3 days ago? You tell him the truth. Which truth? The one where you're a hero swooping in to save us? Or the one where you're a stranger who had a one-night stand with his mother and wants to play house now that you know? The harsh words hit their mark. Alexander absorbed them, knowing she had every right to her anger. Every right to protect her child from the chaos his presence represented. I don't have all the answers, he admitted. I don't know how to be a father, don't know how to navigate this, but I know I can't walk away now. Won't walk away. That child deserves better than I had growing up, and you deserve better than killing yourself to provide it. What did you have growing up? The question came softer, curious rather than combative. Money. Every advantage except the ones that mattered. He leaned against the opposite wall, suddenly tired. My parents died when I was 12. Car accident, like yours. After that, it was boarding schools and trustees and learning that emotions were weaknesses to be eliminated. I built an empire because that's all I knew how to do. Build things, control things, make money because money was the only constant that made sense. Evelyn's expression softened fractionally. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me what I am. He paused. For better or worse. And what are you, exactly? Alone. The admission surprised him as much as it probably surprised her. Successful and respected and completely alone. Until 3 days ago when I looked at a photograph and saw myself staring back, saw a possibility I didn't know I wanted. She studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed in ways boardrooms never managed. This isn't a business deal you can optimize, Mr. Wolf. Alexander. If you're going to let me into your life, call me Alexander. I haven't decided if I'm letting you into anything yet. Fair enough? He checked his watch. Your break must be almost over. Yeah. She didn't move. What happens now? That's up to you. I'd like to meet him. Properly. When you're ready. And if I'm never ready? He met her gaze steadily. Then I'll respect that. But I hope you won't punish him for my mistakes. He deserves to know his father. He deserves a father who wants him, not one who feels obligated. I don't feel obligated. The words came with surprising vehemence. I feel... He stopped, searching for honesty. Terrified and fascinated and completely out of my depth, but not obligated. Never that. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. I need time to think about this, to figure out how to even begin explaining it to a 3-year-old. Take all the time you need. Here. He pulled a card from his wallet and offered it to her. My direct number, not my office. Call me when you're ready. She took the card with obvious reluctance, turning it over in her fingers like it might bite. Okay. And Evelyn? The money I gave you the other night, That was just the beginning. Whatever you need, rent, bills, daycare, food, whatever makes your life easier. Let me help. I don't want it. This isn't about what you want. It's about what Ethan needs. His voice gentled. Please, let me do this one thing. Her resistance wavered, pragmatism warring with pride. Pragmatism won. Okay, but we do this my way, on my terms. I won't have you showing up and disrupting his life. Your terms, I agree. She nodded and pushed away from the wall, heading back toward the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at him. Alexander? Yes? That night, the hotel. Her voice dropped. It mattered to me too. I want you to know that. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the restaurant and leaving him alone in the alley with rain beginning to fall and his entire world reconfigured into something strange and terrifying and utterly unexpected. Alexander stood there for a long time, letting the rain soak through his expensive suit while he tried to process everything that had just happened. He had a son, a 3-year-old boy with his eyes and his mother's strength, a child who existed in a world so far from his own they might as well have been on different planets. And somehow, impossibly, Alexander had to find a way to bridge that distance without destroying what Evelyn had built through sheer force of will. His phone buzzed. Richard. How did it go? Alexander typed back with cold fingers. She confirmed it. I have a son. Holy shit. Are you okay? Was he? Alexander looked up at the slice of sky visible between buildings, at clouds heavy with rain and possibility. I don't know yet, but I will be. He pocketed the phone and headed back to his car, where David waited with the engine running and questions in his eyes that Alexander wasn't ready to answer. The drive back to his empty penthouse felt longer than usual. The building that had always represented success now just looked lonely. The apartment that had always been his sanctuary now felt like an expensive prison. Everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Alexander Wolf had absolutely no idea what came next. 3 days passed before Evelyn called. 3 days during which Alexander accomplished almost nothing productive, which was so out of character that his entire executive team began treating him like he might detonate at any moment. He sat through board meetings without hearing a word, signed documents without reading them, stared at spreadsheets that blurred into meaningless numbers, while his mind replayed the conversation in the alley on an endless loop. When his phone finally rang with her number, he was in the middle of a conference call with investors in Shanghai. He hung up on them mid-sentence. Hello? It's me. Evelyn's voice sounded tight, nervous. I've been thinking about what you said, about meeting Ethan. Alexander's heart rate kicked up in a way that no business deal had ever managed. And I think maybe we should try, but slow, really slow. I need you to understand that he's just a kid. He doesn't understand complicated adult situations, and I won't have him confused or hurt. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't like one of your board meetings. You can't just waltz in and take control. This is his life, our life, and it's messy and small and nothing like what you're used to. I know that. I'm serious, Alexander. If we do this, you follow my rules. You don't show up unannounced. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't, her voice caught. You don't break his heart. Because if you hurt him, I swear to God, I won't. The words came out fierce. I swear to you, Evelyn, whatever else happens, I won't hurt him. Silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, she exhaled. Okay. Saturday. There's a park near us. Thompson Square. 2 o'clock. Just don't dress like a billionaire, okay? Wear jeans or something. Try to look normal. I'll do my best. And Alexander? He doesn't know about you being his father. I told him we're meeting a friend of mine, a friend who wants to meet him. That's all he knows right now. The limitation stung more than it should have. Whatever you think is best. I do. This is best. For now. She paused. Don't make me regret this. You won't. The call ended and Alexander sat staring at his phone for a long moment before Richard's voice crackled through the conference room speakers. Did you just hang up on the Shanghai investors? Reschedule them. Alex, this is the third meeting you've blown off this week. What the hell is going on? Alexander pressed the disconnect button and stood, grabbing his jacket. His assistant looked up in alarm as he strode past her desk. Cancel everything for Saturday, he said, without breaking stride, and get me the contact information for the best family law attorney in the city. A family law? Sir, I don't understand. You don't need to. Just do it. He made it to the elevator before Richard caught up with him, slightly out of breath from jogging down the hallway. What's happening? Talk to me. I'm meeting my son on Saturday. The words still felt surreal. I need to know my legal rights. What I can and can't do. What happens if... He stopped, not wanting to voice the possibility. I need to be prepared. Richard studied him with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex equation. You're terrified. I'm being practical. You're terrified, Richard repeated. I've known you 15 years and I've never seen you like this. Not before the biggest merger of your career, not when the market crashed and we almost lost everything. But a 3-year-old has you completely rattled. He's not just a 3-year-old. He's mine. Yeah, Richard clapped him on the shoulder. He is. And that's why you're terrified. Because for once in your life, you're facing something that actually matters. The words followed Alexander home, echoing through his penthouse while he tried to work and failed. He'd built empires from nothing, had navigated hostile takeovers and corporate warfare with cold efficiency, had stared down boardrooms full of men who wanted to see him fail and come out victorious every single time. And now he couldn't stop his hands from shaking at the thought of meeting a child who shared his DNA. Friday night, he barely slept. Saturday morning arrived with the inexorable quality of a deadline, and Alexander stood in his closet staring at rows of suits and dress shirts and Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nothing looked right. Nothing looked normal. He finally settled on jeans he'd owned for 5 years but never worn, and a gray sweater that might have been too expensive but at least didn't scream wealth. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man playing dress-up, trying to disguise himself as someone approachable. This is ridiculous, he muttered. He's 3. He won't care what you're wearing. But Evelyn would care, and somehow her opinion had started to matter in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. The drive to Thompson Square took 20 minutes through Saturday traffic. David pulled up to the park and looked at Alexander in the rearview mirror. You want me to wait? No, I'll catch a cab back. Alexander hesitated with his hand on the door. Do I look okay? Like a normal person? Sir, you're a billionaire worried about meeting a toddler. There's nothing normal about this situation. That's not helpful. Wasn't trying to be. But David's expression softened. You look fine. Just be yourself. Kids are pretty good at spotting bullshit. Alexander climbed out into autumn sunshine that felt too bright, too cheerful for the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Thompson Square wasn't much. A few rusted swings, a slide with chipped paint, benches that had seen better decades. A handful of parents scattered around the perimeter, while children shrieked and played with the unselfconscious joy of people who hadn't learned disappointment yet. He spotted Evelyn immediately. She sat on a bench near the swings, wearing jeans and a sweater similar to his own, her hair loose around her shoulders. And beside her, bouncing with barely contained energy, was Ethan. Alexander's breath stopped. Photos hadn't prepared him for the reality, for the way the child moved with the chaotic enthusiasm of a small tornado, for the way his laugh carried across the playground, bright and unrestrained, for the way those green eyes, his eyes, sparkled with delight at something Evelyn said. His son, his child, a living, breathing person who existed because of one night 4 years ago when Alexander had made the rare mistake of being human. Evelyn saw him approaching and said something to Ethan, who immediately spun around to stare. Alexander forced himself to keep walking, to close the distance between his old life and whatever came next. Hi. His voice came out rougher than intended. Hi. Evelyn stood, her hand resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan, this is my friend Alexander. Alexander, this is Ethan. The child tilted his head back to look up at Alexander, completely unimpressed by height or expensive sweaters or the fact that his entire world was about to change. You're really tall, Ethan announced. I am. Are you a giant? No, just tall. Do you play basketball? I don't. Why not? Tall people play basketball. Alexander found himself completely disarmed by the rapid-fire interrogation. I never learned. That's sad. Ethan turned to Evelyn. Mama, can we swing now? In a minute, baby. Say hello to Alexander first. Hello, Alexander. The words came out in a sing-song rush. Can you push me on the swing? The request landed like a physical blow. Alexander looked at Evelyn, searching for permission or guidance or some indication of what he was supposed to do. She nodded slightly. I'd like that, he managed. Ethan grabbed his hand without hesitation, small fingers wrapping around Alexander's with complete trust, and dragged him toward the swings. Alexander followed in a daze, trying to process the feeling of that tiny hand in his, the weight of it, the absolute faith it represented. Higher! Ethan demanded once Alexander had gotten him situated and started pushing. Make me fly. Not too high, Evelyn called from the bench, anxiety clear in her voice. He's fearless. No sense of danger whatsoever. Alexander adjusted his pushes, finding a rhythm that sent Ethan sailing forward without launching him into orbit. The child's laughter filled the air, pure and uncomplicated, and something in Alexander's chest cracked open. This was his son. This small person who demanded to fly, who grabbed hands without fear, who saw the world as an adventure waiting to happen. Are you Mama's boyfriend? Ethan asked suddenly, craning his neck to look back at Alexander. No, just a friend. Do you want to be her boyfriend? She doesn't have one. Mrs. Chen says Mama needs to date more, but Mama says she's too busy. Heat crept up Alexander's neck. That's not really my business. Mama's pretty. Don't you think she's pretty? Yes. The word escaped before he could stop it. Very pretty. Then why aren't you her boyfriend? It's complicated. That's what Mom always says when she doesn't want to explain something. Ethan kicked his legs, trying to pump higher. I think grown-ups just like making things hard. You might be right about that. They swung in silence for a few minutes, Alexander pushing while Ethan hummed a tuneless song. Finally, the child spoke again. Do you have kids? The question stabbed straight through Alexander's composure. Because if you don't, you could practice with me. I'm good at being a kid. Mama says so. I'm sure you are. I can count to 20 and I know all my colors and I can write my name, see? He dragged his feet to stop the swing and jumped off with reckless abandon, landing in the wood chips and immediately starting to draw with a stick. Ethan. That's me. Alexander crouched beside him, studying the shaky letters scratched in the dirt. That's very good. Mama taught me. She's the best teacher. She knows everything. Pride filled his voice. She works really hard so we can have a home and food and stuff. Sometimes she's really tired, but she always reads me stories before bed. What's your favorite story? The one about the dragon who was sad because he didn't have any friends. But then he met a knight, and the knight wasn't scared of him, and they became best friends and went on adventures. Ethan looked up with those devastating green eyes. Do you have any friends? The question hit harder than it should have. Not really. That's sad. Everyone needs friends. The child considered this seriously. I could be your friend if you want. Mama says I'm good at making friends. Something in Alexander's throat tightened. I'd like that. Okay. Ethan jumped to his feet with the mercurial energy of small children everywhere. Now we're friends. Friends play together. Can you go down the slide? I think I'm too big for the slide. Nobody's too big for slides. Come on. Alexander found himself being dragged toward the playground equipment, acutely aware of Evelyn watching from the bench with an expression he couldn't read. Other parents looked over with curiosity, a tall man in expensive jeans being ordered around by a 3-year-old probably made for decent entertainment. The slide was indeed too small. Alexander got stuck halfway down while Ethan dissolved into giggles at the top. It took some undignified maneuvering to extract himself while maintaining any shred of dignity. You're funny, Ethan declared. I like you. I like you too. Good. Now watch this. He proceeded to demonstrate his athletic prowess by hanging from the monkey bars for approximately 3 seconds before dropping to the ground. Did you see? Very impressive. I'm going to be in the Olympics when I grow up, or an astronaut, or a dinosaur doctor. Mama says I can be anything. Your mama's right. They played for another hour. Alexander pushed Ethan on the swings at least 20 more times, helped him navigate the climbing structure, and participated in an elaborate game involving pirates and buried treasure that made absolutely no sense but somehow didn't matter. The child's energy seemed limitless, his joy infectious, his acceptance of Alexander complete and uncomplicated. Finally, Evelyn called them over. "Snack time. Come on, baby." Ethan raced to the bench where she'd laid out apple slices and crackers in juice boxes. He plopped down beside her and immediately started eating while maintaining a running commentary about everything he'd just done. "Alexander's my friend now, Mama. He can't fit on the slide, which is really funny. And he doesn't play basketball even though he's tall enough. And he said you're pretty." Evelyn's eyes snapped to Alexander's face, her expression somewhere between mortified and amused. Did he now? "I was answering a direct question," Alexander said, feeling like he was 16 again and caught by a girl's parents. "He asked if I thought you were pretty. And apparently you had an answer ready. I don't lie to children." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or appreciation? Good policy. Ethan finished his snack with the same chaotic speed he did everything else, then announced he needed to use the bathroom. Evelyn took him toward the public restrooms on the far side of the park, leaving Alexander alone on the bench with his thoughts spinning. An hour ago he'd been terrified. Now he felt something worse. Hope. Dangerous, complicated hope that this could actually work, that he could be part of this child's life, that maybe he could learn to be the father Ethan deserved. His phone buzzed. "Richard, how's it going?" Alexander took a photo of the playground and sent it back. Better than expected. "That's great, but Alex, be careful. Don't get too attached if the situation isn't stable." Too late, Alexander thought. Way too late. Evelyn and Ethan returned, the child immediately launching into a new game that involved running in circles while making sound effects. Evelyn settled on the bench beside Alexander, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something simple and floral that probably cost $5 and somehow suited her perfectly. "He likes you," she said quietly. "That's good. I was worried that I'd be terrible at this, that he'd see through you. Kids are good at that, seeing through bullshit." She glanced at him. "But you're being genuine. Thank you for that." "I don't know how to be anything else around him, around either of you." She studied him for a long moment. "What do you want, Alexander? Really want? Because if this is about guilt or obligation or checking off some box in your head, we're done right now. I won't let you hurt him." "I want to know him." The words came without thought. "I want to be part of his life. I want—" He stopped, searching for honesty. "I want to matter, to him, to you. I want this to be real." "It is real? Too real. That's what scares me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "In 3 weeks, he's going to have his 4th birthday. I've been saving for months to buy him a tricycle from the thrift store. That's his big present. A used tricycle." Her voice cracked. "And you could buy him 1,000 tricycles without even noticing the cost. How do I explain that difference to a child?" "You don't have to explain anything. Let me—" "No." The word came sharp. "I know what you're going to say. That you'll buy him everything, pay for everything, fix everything. But that's not what he needs." "What does he need?" "Stability. Consistency. Someone who shows up and stays. Not someone who swoops in with gifts and then disappears when things get complicated." She turned to face him fully. "My father left when I was 6. Just walked out one day and never came back. My mother spent the rest of her life waiting for him to return. I won't do that to Ethan. I won't let him hope for something that isn't going to last. I'm not going anywhere." You say that now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize that parenting is boring and hard and nothing like this perfect afternoon? What happens when he has tantrums in the grocery store or refuses to eat anything but chicken nuggets for a week straight or wakes up screaming from nightmares at 2 in the morning? Then I handle it the same way you do. You don't know how to handle it. You've never had to. So teach me. He caught her hand, the gesture surprising them both. Evelyn, I'm not asking to replace you or take over. I'm asking for a chance to learn, to be present, to show up and keep showing up until he knows I'm not leaving. She looked down at their joined hands. This is insane. 3 weeks ago, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Now you're holding my hand in a park while our son plays pirates. Life's funny that way. Funny isn't the word I'd use. But she didn't pull away. If we do this, if we really try this, I need ground rules. Name them. No expensive gifts, not yet. He doesn't need a million toys, he needs time and attention. Agreed. You don't make promises you can't keep. If you say you'll be somewhere, you're there. No excuses about work or meetings or I'll be there. And you respect that I'm his mother. I make the final decisions about his care, his schedule, his life. You don't override me just because you have money. The last one stung a little, but Alexander nodded. Your house, your rules. Okay. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. We'll try. Slowly. Carefully. But I'm watching you, Alexander Wolf. One wrong move and... Mama, Alexander! Ethan came racing over, breathless and beaming. Can Alexander come have dinner with us? Please, we're having spaghetti and it's really good. Evelyn opened her mouth, probably to say no, to maintain boundaries, to keep their worlds separate a little longer. But Alexander spoke first. I'd love to, if that's okay with your mama. They both looked at Evelyn. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting some internal battle, then sighed. Fine, but fair warning, our apartment is small and the elevator's broken, and I'm not a great cook. I don't care about any of that. You say that now. 40 minutes later, Alexander understood what she'd meant. The building really was worse on the inside, peeling paint, flickering lights, stairs that creaked ominously underfoot. Her apartment was a single room barely large enough for the double bed, small table, and portable closet that constituted her furniture. The kitchen was a hot plate and mini fridge tucked in one corner. The bathroom door didn't quite close all the way. This was where his son lived, where Evelyn had kept them both alive through sheer force of will. I know it's not much, she said, reading his expression, but it's clean and it's safe and the rent's sort of affordable. How much? Why? Because I'm curious. $1,200 a month. She started pulling out a pot and ingredients. Which is insane for this place, but it's New York and I didn't have other options. $1,200. Alexander spent more than that on suits, on wine, on things he couldn't even remember buying. Ethan had already dragged out a basket of toys and started building something with blocks. Alexander, help me make a castle. In a minute, baby, Evelyn said. Let Alexander sit down first. I'm fine. Alexander lowered himself to the floor beside Ethan, his long legs awkward in the cramped space. Show me how to build a castle. The next hour passed in a blur of block constructions, spaghetti that was actually pretty good despite Evelyn's protests, and Ethan's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether Alexander had ever seen a real dinosaur. They ate at the small table, knees bumping, and Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so crowded and so content simultaneously. After dinner, Ethan's energy finally started flagging. He curled up on the bed with a worn stuffed elephant while Evelyn cleaned up, his eyes drooping despite his insistence that he wasn't tired. Story time, Evelyn announced. Say goodnight to Alexander. Can Alexander read the story? Ethan asked around a yawn. Evelyn looked at Alexander, surprise clear on her face. Would you want to? Want to wasn't a strong enough word for the emotion that gripped him. Yes. She handed him a book with a cracked spine, the dragon story Ethan had mentioned earlier. Alexander settled on the bed beside his son, acutely aware of the small, warm body pressed against his side, and started reading. Halfway through, Ethan fell asleep. His breathing evened out and his hand relaxed its grip on the stuffed elephant, and Alexander's voice trailed off as he stared down at the sleeping child. His son, asleep against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. He trusts you already, Evelyn whispered from where she stood by the kitchen area. That's good. And terrifying. I won't betray that trust. I hope not. She moved closer, her voice dropping even lower. You should probably go. It's late and I need to get him into pajamas and... Evelyn. Alexander carefully extracted himself from the bed, moving with exaggerated care to avoid waking Ethan. Thank you. For today. For letting me in. For everything. Don't thank me yet. This was the easy part. I know. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Can I see him again? Soon? Wednesday. I have the evening off. We could do dinner again. Here or here's perfect. She nodded, then surprised him by reaching up and adjusting his collar, which had gotten twisted somehow. The gesture was intimate and casual all at once, and it made his heart do something complicated. You're better at this than you think, she said softly. The parent thing. You're good with him. He makes it easy. He does. She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Good night, Alexander. Good night. He left her apartment and descended the stairs in a daze, his mind replaying every moment of the evening. The walk back to the street, the cab ride home, the elevator up to his penthouse. All of it felt surreal, like he'd stepped out of his life and into someone else's for a few hours. His apartment felt emptier than usual. Bigger, colder. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Alexander stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at Manhattan spread before him like a jeweled kingdom. He'd spent 20 years building this empire, this view, this life of power and control and absolute independence. And tonight, sitting on the floor of a cramped apartment building castles with a 3-year-old, he'd felt more alive than any of it had ever made him feel. His phone rang. Richard again. How'd it go? He fell asleep during the story I was reading him. Silence. Then, Jesus, Alex, you're already in love with him. Is that what this is? What else would it be? Alexander didn't have an answer. He stood at his window and looked out at his kingdom and felt the foundation of everything he'd built shifting beneath his feet. I'm going to be a father, he said quietly, a real one, not just biologically. I know, and that terrifies the shit out of you. Yes. Good. That means you're taking it seriously. Richard paused. What about the mother? Alexander thought of Evelyn, her wariness and her strength, the way she'd looked at him when he'd promised not to hurt their son, the casual intimacy of her adjusting his collar. She's remarkable. That's not what I asked. I know. Alex, I have to go. He ended the call and continued staring out at the city. 3 weeks ago, his life had made sense, had been predictable and controlled and exactly what he'd designed it to be. Now every certainty had dissolved, replaced by a 3-year-old with his eyes and a woman who'd survived everything the world threw at her and come out stronger. Now he stood in his empty penthouse and felt the ghost of his son's weight against his side, the memory of reading a story about a lonely dragon who found a friend. Now everything had changed, and Alexander Wolfe, who had spent his entire adult life avoiding complications, found himself hoping that Wednesday would come quickly. Because for the first time in longer than he could remember, he had somewhere he actually wanted to be. Wednesday didn't come quickly enough. Alexander found himself watching the clock like a teenager waiting for prom, which was absurd and embarrassing and completely unavoidable. He delegated meetings he normally would have attended, cut a conference call short when it ran past 5, left his office at 6:30, unheard of, while his assistant stared after him with undisguised shock. He stopped at a bodega near Evelyn's building and stood paralyzed in front of the wine section. Too expensive would make her uncomfortable. Too cheap would seem thoughtless. He finally grabbed a mid-range bottle and added fresh bread from the bakery case because showing up empty-handed felt wrong. The stairs to her apartment felt less daunting this time. He knocked and heard Ethan's voice shriek with excitement. "Alexander's here! Mama, he came back!" The door opened and Evelyn stood there in jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair damp like she'd just showered. She looked tired and young and beautiful in a way that made Alexander's chest tight. "Hi," she said. "You're early." Traffic was better than expected. "I can come back." "No, it's fine. Come in." She stepped aside and Ethan immediately launched himself at Alexander's legs. "You came back. I told Mama you would, but she said maybe you'd be busy, and I said no way, because we're friends now, and friends don't forget about each other." Alexander crouched down to the child's level. "I would never forget about you." "See, Mama? I told you." Ethan grabbed Alexander's hand. "Come see what I built. It's a spaceship, or maybe a train. I haven't decided yet." The next hour unfolded with the comfortable chaos that was becoming familiar. Ethan showed Alexander his latest block creation. They had simple pasta for dinner because Evelyn was working a double shift the next day and didn't have energy for complicated cooking, and afterward they played a card game that Ethan mostly made up rules for as they went. Alexander watched Evelyn throughout the evening, the way she moved through the cramped space with practiced efficiency, the way she smiled when Ethan said something ridiculous, the way exhaustion sat in the corners of her eyes no matter how hard she tried to hide it. After Ethan fell asleep during the story, a different dragon book this time, Evelyn made tea and they sat at the small table while rain started pattering against the single window. "He talks about you constantly now," she said quietly. "At daycare, at bedtime, first thing in the morning, Alexander this, Alexander that." Mrs. Chen asked if I was dating someone. "What did you tell her?" "That it's complicated." She wrapped her hands around her mug, which is the understatement of the century. "It doesn't have to be complicated." "Yes, it does. You're his father, but he doesn't know that. You're part of his life, but not really. You have unlimited resources, and we have—" She gestured at the apartment. "This, how is that not complicated? We figure it out as we go." "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to explain to a 3-year-old why his new friend lives in a building with a doorman while we live somewhere the elevator's been broken for 6 months. Alexander set down his tea. "Move." "What?" "Move. Out of here. Let me find you a proper apartment. Something safe with working elevators and heat that doesn't cut out and—" "No." The word came flat and final. "Absolutely not." "Evelyn, I said no. We're not your charity project." "It's not charity. He's my son. You're his mother. Taking care of you is taking care of him." By throwing money at the situation? Her voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself and lowered it. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Write a check and fix the problem. Make it all neat and manageable." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" She stood and carried her mug to the sink. "You've been part of his life for a week, Alexander. 1 week, and you already want to change everything. I want to make things better." "Better for who? For us or for your conscience?" She turned to face him. "Because I've been doing this alone for 4 years. 4 years of figuring out how to survive. And yeah, it's been hard. Yeah, I'm tired all the time and scared I'm not enough. But we made it. We're still here, and I did that without anyone's help. You shouldn't have had to. But I did, and I'm proud of that. Proud that I kept him safe and fed and loved without anyone riding in to rescue me." Her eyes filled with tears, she blinked back furiously. "Don't take that away from me by making me feel like everything I did was inadequate." The words hit like a physical blow. Alexander stood and moved toward her, stopping just short of touching. "That's not what I meant. Not at all." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant—" He struggled for the right words. "I meant that you're the strongest person I've ever met. That what you've accomplished is extraordinary, but just because you can survive alone doesn't mean you should have to. Let me help. Not because you need rescuing, but because you deserve better than this constant struggle." She looked at him for a long moment, emotions warring across her face. "I can't be what you want me to be." "I don't want you to be anything except yourself. You don't even know myself, not really. You know the exhausted waitress who collapsed in your presence. You know the single mother barely holding it together, but you don't know me. So let me know you. Why? Because you feel guilty? Because you want to play happy family now that you've discovered you have a son? Because I can't stop thinking about you." The admission escaped before he could stop it. "Either of you. Because that night 4 years ago mattered to me too. Because—" He stopped, uncertain how to finish. Evelyn stared at him. "Alexander, I'm not asking for anything. Not asking you to be grateful or obligated or anything else. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of this, to know both of you, to help if you'll let me." "Help how? By moving us into some luxury apartment? By paying for everything so I can quit working and be a full-time mother? By making my entire life revolve around what you think is best? Is that really what you think I want?" "I don't know what you want. That's the problem." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know if you want a son or a project. If you want to be a father or just ease your conscience. If you're going to stick around when things get messy or disappear when the novelty wears off. I'm not going anywhere." "You keep saying that. But it's only been a week. Come back to me in a month, 6 months, a year, when he's had the flu and kept you up all night. When he's thrown a tantrum in public and embarrassed you. When being a parent is boring and hard and nothing like these perfect evenings. You think these evenings are perfect? Compared to most of my life? Yes. She laughed without humor. You show up and play and read stories and then you leave. You go back to your penthouse and your perfect life while I stay here and handle the hard parts. The bath time fights, and the bedtime negotiations, and the 3 a.m. wake-ups. That's real parenting, Alexander. Not this. He absorbed the accusation, knowing she was right, knowing he'd been treating this like visiting hours instead of real life. Then let me do the hard parts too. You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me. They stood in tense silence, the rain picking up outside while Ethan slept peacefully across the room. Finally, Evelyn sighed. His birthday is in 2 weeks, Saturday the 14th. I'm taking him to the zoo because it's free for kids his age, and then we're coming back here for cake. She met his eyes. You can come if you want, but no gifts, nothing expensive. Just be there. That's all he really wants anyway. I'll be there. Okay. She moved to the door, opening it slightly. A dismissal. I need to get some sleep. Double shift tomorrow. Alexander wanted to argue, to push back against the walls she kept constructing between them, but he could see the exhaustion winning, could see her defenses crumbling from sheer weariness. I'll see you Saturday then, for his birthday. Yeah, Saturday. He left and descended the stairs with her words echoing in his head. She was right about everything, about him not understanding real parenting, about showing up for the easy parts while she handled the rest, about the massive gulf between their lives that no amount of money could bridge without fundamentally changing who she was. But she was wrong about one thing. He wasn't going anywhere, and he was going to prove it, even if it killed him. The next 2 weeks tested that resolve. Alexander showed up for dinner 3 more times, learning the rhythm of Ethan's bedtime routine and the specific way the child liked his sandwiches cut. He arrived at the apartment one evening to find Evelyn barely functional with a migraine, Ethan wound up and cranky, and dinner consisting of cereal because she hadn't had time to shop. He'd taken over, fed Ethan, played quiet games until the child settled, read 3 stories instead of 1, and then cleaned the apartment while Evelyn slept. When she woke 2 hours later, groggy and disoriented, she'd found Alexander doing dishes with Ethan perched on the counter beside him, chattering about dinosaurs. She hadn't said thank you, but something in her expression had softened. The night before Ethan's birthday, Alexander's phone rang at 11 p.m., Evelyn's number. Hello? I'm sorry to call so late. Her voice sounded strained, but I don't know what else to do. He sat up immediately. What's wrong? The landlord showed up today. He's selling the building. Everyone has to be out by the end of next month. A shaky breath. I've been looking for places all evening, and everything that's remotely affordable is in neighborhoods I won't raise Ethan somewhere with that much crime. But anything safe is twice what I'm paying now, and I don't have savings, and... Breathe, Alexander said quietly. Just breathe. Where are you now? Home. Ethan's asleep. I'm fine, Her voice cracked. I'm so tired of this. Every time I think we're stable, something happens. Every single time. Let me help, please. Let me find you somewhere safe. I can't afford... I'm not asking you to afford it. I'm asking you to let me do this one thing. Not charity, not control. Just taking care of my son. And you, because you matter too. Silence stretched across the line. He could hear her breathing, could picture her in that cramped apartment fighting tears and pride in equal measure. Okay, she whispered finally. Okay, but nothing crazy. Not a penthouse or just somewhere normal, with an elevator that works, and heat, real heat. I'll find something, I promise. Thank you. The words came small and defeated, like admitting she needed help cost her everything. I should go. Tomorrow's going to be long. Evelyn? Yeah? You're not failing. You're not weak. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. He heard her breath hitch. Don't be nice to me right now. I can't handle nice. Too bad. Get some sleep. He hung up and immediately called his real estate attorney, waking him without apology. By morning, Alexander had a list of suitable apartments, safe neighborhoods, good schools, reasonable rent that he'd cover without telling Evelyn the actual cost. She'd think she was paying market rate. He'd quietly subsidize the difference. Deception, maybe, but necessary. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, one of those crisp autumn days where the sky stretched impossibly blue and the world felt full of possibility. Alexander met Evelyn and Ethan at the subway station near the zoo, carrying only a small wrapped package despite Evelyn's warning about no gifts. Alexander! Ethan launched himself with his usual enthusiasm. It's my birthday. I'm 4 now. That's this many. He held up 4 fingers with intense concentration. Very impressive. Happy birthday. Did you bring me a present? Mama said you wouldn't, but I said maybe you would because you're my friend. Ethan, Evelyn warned, we talked about this. I know, but I did bring something small, Alexander admitted, but your mama has to say it's okay first. Ethan immediately turned pleading eyes on Evelyn. Please, Mama, please. She looked at Alexander with an expression that promised retribution if he'd gone overboard. How small? Very small, I promise. Fine. But Ethan, you say thank you nicely. The child ripped into the wrapping with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. Inside was a book, the dragon story he loved, but a new copy to replace the falling apart version they'd been reading. It's the dragon. Ethan hugged the book to his chest. Thank you, Alexander. This is the best present. Alexander glanced at Evelyn, who was fighting a smile. Just a book, he said quietly. Nothing extravagant. I see that. Thank you. They spent the day at the zoo, and it was perfect in the way unplanned things sometimes were. Ethan dragged them from exhibit to exhibit, his enthusiasm infectious. He was particularly enthralled by the lions, standing at the glass barrier with his face pressed close while a massive male paced just feet away. He's the king, Ethan announced. Mama says lions are brave and strong. Your mama's right. Are you brave, Alexander? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. Maybe. I think you are. Because you're really tall, and tall people are usually brave. The logic was flawless in its simplicity. When I grow up, I'm going to be tall and brave like you. Something in Alexander's chest cracked open. He looked at Evelyn over Ethan's head and found her watching him with an unreadable expression. After the zoo, they headed back to the apartment for cake. Evelyn had baked it herself, slightly lopsided chocolate with blue frosting and candles that kept falling over. But Ethan's face when he saw it lit up like she'd given him the moon. Make a wish, baby, Evelyn said, lighting the candles. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut with theatrical concentration, then blew them out with enough force to send frosting splattering. They all laughed and cut slices that were too big, and ate with plastic forks while Ethan recounted every single thing he'd seen at the zoo in exhaustive detail. After cake, after Ethan had finally crashed from sugar and excitement, Alexander helped Evelyn clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, falling into a rhythm that felt practiced despite its newness. Thank you, she said finally, for the book, for today, for everything. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. She dried the last plate and set it aside. I'm not good at accepting help, at letting people in. After my parents died, I learned that depending on people just meant more opportunities to be disappointed. So I stopped depending, stopped expecting, just focused on surviving. And now? Now I have a son who deserves better than just survival, who deserves a father, even if it terrifies me. She turned to face him. I found an apartment, 2-bedroom place in Queens. Rent's higher than I'm paying now, but manageable if I pick up extra shifts. We can move in at the end of the month. Alexander knew the apartment, knew exactly what it cost because he'd arranged it specifically, knew she'd be paying a fraction of market rate. That's great. Yeah. She smiled, and this time it was genuine. Real heat, working elevator, bedroom for Ethan. It's more than I thought we'd have. You both deserve more than you've had. Maybe. She studied him. I'm sorry about the other night. When I called upset, I shouldn't have dumped all that on you. Yes, you should have. That's what... He stopped, uncertain what to call what they were becoming. That's what people do. When they care about each other. They call when things fall apart. Is that what we're doing? Caring about each other? I think we might be. She moved closer, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. This scares me. You scare me. Not because you're dangerous, but because you make me want things. I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. Like what? Partnership. Help. Someone to share the weight with. She reached up and touched his face. A gentle, hesitant gesture. I spent 4 years telling myself I didn't need anyone, that we were fine alone, but the truth is I'm exhausted and lonely, and so tired of being strong all the time. Alexander covered her hand with his own. Then stop. Let me be strong for a while. I don't know how. We'll figure it out together. She laughed quietly. You keep saying that, like it's simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're making it harder than it needs to be. Maybe. She stepped closer still, her body almost touching his. Alexander. Mama? Ethan's sleepy voice interrupted from the bed. I had a dream about the lions. Evelyn pulled back, the moment fracturing. Coming, baby. She went to comfort Ethan, and Alexander stood in the small kitchen trying to regulate his breathing. That had been, what, almost a kiss? A confession of feelings neither of them were ready to name? He left shortly after, once Ethan had settled again. Evelyn walked him to the door, and they stood in the narrow hallway with 1,000 unspoken things hanging between them. Wednesday? She asked. Wednesday, or sooner if you need help moving. We might, she smiled. Good night, Alexander. Good night, Evelyn. He made it 3 steps down the stairs before his phone buzzed. A text from her. Thank you for being here. For him. For us. It means more than you know. He typed back quickly. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. The move happened 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning that dawned cold and clear. Alexander showed up at 7 a.m. with David in the car, ready to help pack. Evelyn had been up since 5, boxes scattered everywhere, looking frantic and overwhelmed. I didn't realize we had so much stuff, she said, surveying the chaos. This is insane. How did all this fit in here? We'll figure it out. Alexander started packing books while David handled kitchen items, and Ethan helped by moving small toys from one box to another with intense concentration. The work went faster with 3 adults. By noon, they had everything loaded and were making the drive to Queens. The new apartment was in a pre-war building that had been renovated. Nothing fancy, but clean and solid with that working elevator Evelyn had dreamed about. Second floor, Alexander said, carrying the first box up. Not too high, not too low. It's perfect. Evelyn stood in the empty living room with Ethan on her hip, looking around with wonder. There's so much space. Ethan, look, you're going to have your own bedroom. My own room? The child's eyes went wide. Really? Really, baby. They spent the afternoon unpacking. Alexander assembled Ethan's bed, a simple frame Evelyn had ordered used, while David handled the kitchen. Evelyn organized clothes and books and all the small pieces of their life. By evening, the apartment looked almost livable. Pizza? Alexander suggested. My treat. You don't have to. I want to. Consider it a housewarming gift. They ate pizza sitting on the floor because the small table hadn't been reassembled yet, Ethan between them chattering about his new room and how he was going to arrange all his toys. The moment felt domestic and right in a way that should have terrified Alexander but instead filled him with strange contentment. After Ethan fell asleep in his new bed, still clutching the dragon book, Evelyn and Alexander stood in the living room surrounded by half-empty boxes. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. The help moving, the apartment, just being here. You keep thanking me. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because 6 weeks ago, I was alone and drowning and convinced that was just how life would be. And now, she gestured at the apartment. Now I have this. Have you. Have help. It's overwhelming. Good overwhelming or bad overwhelming? I'm not sure yet. She moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize this is too hard or too complicated or not worth the effort. Alexander moved to stand beside her. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks, you and Ethan became the most important parts of my life. More important than business or money or anything else I've spent years building. She turned to face him. You barely know us. I know enough. Know you're stronger than you believe. Know he's remarkable. Know that I've spent my entire adult life alone and convincing myself I preferred it that way. And then I found that photograph, and everything changed. Alexander, I'm falling for you. The words escaped before he could stop them. Both of you. I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably terrifying for you to hear, but it's true. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Evelyn stared at him, emotions flickering across her face, too fast to track. You can't just say things like that. Why not? Because it's not fair, because I've spent 4 years building walls and you're demolishing them without permission. Because I'm scared of what happens when you see all the messy parts of me and decide it's too much. What if I don't? What if I see the messy parts and stay anyway? Nobody stays. I will. He took her hands, feeling them tremble slightly. I know you don't believe me yet. No, I have to prove it. But I will, Evelyn. I'll show up and keep showing up until you understand that I'm not going anywhere. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This is crazy. Maybe, but it's the best kind of crazy. She laughed through the tears, then shocked them both by stepping close and kissing him. It was brief and sweet and tasted like hope, like all the possibilities neither of them had dared imagine until this moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. Okay? Okay? Okay, we'll try this, whatever this is. But slowly, carefully, because I won't risk Ethan getting hurt if this falls apart. It won't fall apart. You don't know that. Then we'll make sure it doesn't. He wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Together. Together, she echoed. I like the sound of that. They stood in her new living room with boxes still scattered everywhere and the future uncertain and terrifying and full of promise. Alexander kissed her again, slower this time, feeling the walls between them finally starting to crumble. From the bedroom came Ethan's sleepy voice. Mama? Alexander? Are you still here? They broke apart, both smiling. Evelyn called back. We're here, baby. We're not going anywhere. And for the first time in longer than Alexander could remember, that felt like the absolute truth. The conversation they'd been avoiding came 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening when Ethan asked the question that changed everything. Why don't you live with us, Alexander? They were sitting at the small dining table in the Queen's apartment, finishing dinner. Alexander had been showing up almost every night now, the routine so established that Ethan set 3 places automatically. But the child's innocent question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Evelyn's fork clattered against her plate. Alexander felt his throat close. Because Alexander has his own home, baby, Evelyn said carefully. Remember? We talked about this. But he's here every day, and you smile more when he's here, and he reads me stories better than anyone. Ethan looked between them with those devastating green eyes. Don't you like being here? I love being here, Alexander said honestly. Then why do you leave? The child's voice carried genuine confusion. When people love each other, they stay together. That's what you told me about the knight and the dragon in the story. Evelyn stood abruptly. Bath time. Right now. Come on. But Mama. Now, Ethan. The child went, shooting Alexander a confused look over his shoulder. After the bathroom door closed, Evelyn braced her hands on the counter and dropped her head. We need to tell him, Alexander said quietly. He's asking questions, seeing patterns. It's not fair to keep him in the dark. He's 4 years old. How do we explain this to a 4-year-old? We tell him the truth, that I'm his father. And then what? He asks why you weren't around before, why you didn't know about him, why we're not a normal family. Her voice cracked. I don't have good answers for those questions, Alexander. I don't know how to explain that I kept him from you because I was scared, that I thought I was protecting him, but maybe I was just protecting myself. Alexander moved behind her, not touching, but close enough to offer comfort. Then we tell him we made mistakes, that adults mess up sometimes, that we're figuring it out together. What if he hates me for keeping you away? He could never hate you. You're his world. Was his world. She turned to face him. Now he has you too. And I'm grateful for that, I am. But I'm also terrified of what happens next, of how this changes things. It doesn't have to change what matters. You'll always be his mother. Nothing touches that. She studied his face, searching for something. You really want this? Want us? All the mess and complication and Everything? Yes. Even if it means your life gets completely turned upside down, even if it means board meetings interrupted by calls about stomach bugs and business trips canceled because he has a school play? Especially then. Alexander reached for her hands. I spent 42 years building a perfect, controlled life that meant absolutely nothing. And then I found you two, and everything fell apart in the best possible way. So yes, I want this. Want the mess. Want the complications. Want every single part of it. Bath time ended with Ethan calling for Alexander to come see his bubble beard. They spent another hour on bedtime routine, stories and water refills and negotiations about whether stuffed elephant needed to sleep on the left side or right side of the pillow. By the time Ethan finally settled, it was past 9. Evelyn made tea and they sat on the small couch, her feet tucked under her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Saturday, she said finally. We'll tell him Saturday. Give me a few days to figure out how to explain it. We'll explain it together. Together, she repeated. I'm still getting used to that word. Me too. She rested her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence while the city hummed outside. Alexander felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that had been missing his entire life without him realizing it. Stay tonight, Evelyn said quietly. The couch is lumpy, but it's yours if you want it. Just stay. So when Ethan wakes up, you're here. Start getting him used to the idea before we tell him the truth. Okay. That night, Alexander slept on a couch that was indeed lumpy, covered by a blanket that was too short, in an apartment that was a fraction of the size of his walk-in closet. And when he woke at 6 a.m. to find Ethan standing beside the couch, staring at him with wide eyes, he felt happier than he had in any penthouse. You stayed, Ethan whispered. I did. Does this mean you're going to stay forever? Would you like that? The child nodded solemnly. Mama gets sad when you leave. She tries to hide it, but I can tell. Alexander sat up, struck by the perceptiveness. You're a smart kid, you know that? Mama says I get it from her. Ethan climbed onto the couch beside him. But I think maybe I get some stuff from you too. We have the same eyes. The observation landed like a punch. You noticed that? Mrs. Chen noticed first. She said we could be related. Are we related, Alexander? The question hung there, impossible to deflect. Alexander looked toward Evelyn's bedroom door, which remained closed, then back at the child who watched him with such trust. Yes, he said quietly. We are related. But your mama and I want to talk to you about it together. Can you wait until Saturday? I promise we'll explain everything then. Okay? Ethan accepted this with the easy flexibility of children. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? I don't know how to make pancakes. I'll teach you. I help Mama all the time. They made pancakes together, or rather, Ethan directed while Alexander followed instructions that mostly consisted of more chocolate chips and flip it now before it burns. The results were lopsided and slightly charred, but Ethan declared them perfect. Evelyn emerged around 7, stopping short at the sight of them covered in flour and syrup. What happened to my kitchen? We made breakfast, Ethan announced proudly. Alexander doesn't know how to cook, but I taught him. I'm a good teacher like you, Mama. She caught Alexander's eye over Ethan's head, something soft and vulnerable in her expression. You are the best teacher, baby. Saturday arrived too quickly and not fast enough. Alexander showed up at 10, as requested, finding Evelyn pacing the apartment while Ethan played with blocks. I've been rehearsing this all morning, she said, and I still don't know what to say. We start simple. Tell him I'm his father. Answer whatever questions he has. Don't overthink it. Easy for you to say. Actually, I've been awake since 4, so no, not easy. That surprised a laugh out of her. Okay, we can do this. She called Ethan over and they all settled on the couch, the child between them looking curious but not concerned. Ethan, sweetheart, Evelyn began, Alexander and I need to talk to you about something important. Am I in trouble? No, baby, nothing like that. She took a breath. Remember how you asked Alexander if we're related because of your eyes? Yeah. He said yes, but we had to wait to talk about it. That's right. So, the thing is, her voice faltered. Alexander picked up where she left off. Ethan, do you know what it means when someone is your father? The child's brow furrowed in concentration. It means they're like your daddy. Like Tommy at daycare has a daddy who picks him up sometimes. Right, exactly like that. Alexander felt his heart hammering. I'm your father, Ethan. I'm your daddy. Silence fell while the child processed this. His face cycled through confusion, surprise, and then something that looked like cautious hope. Really? Really? But where were you before? Tommy's daddy has always been there. Evelyn spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. That's my fault, baby. Alexander didn't know about you. I made a mistake and didn't tell him, so he couldn't be here even though he would have wanted to be. Why didn't you tell him? Because I was scared. I thought it would be better if it was just you and me. But I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Ethan looked between them, his small face serious. Are you going to leave now that you know about me? The question broke Alexander's heart. Never. I'm never leaving. I promise you. But you leave every night. Not anymore, Alexander said, making the decision in that moment. If it's okay with your mama, I'd like to stay. Be here every morning when you wake up, every night when you go to sleep, all the time in between. Evelyn's breath caught. Ethan turned to her. Is that okay, Mama? She looked at Alexander with tears streaming down her face. Is that really what you want? It's the only thing I want. Then yes. She laughed through the tears. Yes, it's more than okay. Ethan threw his arms around Alexander's neck with enough force to nearly knock him over. I have a daddy now, a real one. Wait until I tell Tommy. Alexander held his son close, feeling the small body against his chest, and finally understood what people meant when they talked about love that physically hurt. This was it. This overwhelming, terrifying, perfect feeling. I love you, he said into Ethan's hair. I love you so much. I love you too, Daddy. The word came out tentatively, like Ethan was testing how it felt. Then again, stronger. Daddy? They stayed like that for a long moment before Ethan pulled back with his usual mercurial energy. Can we go to the park? I want to play and tell everyone about my daddy. In a little bit, baby, Evelyn said, wiping her eyes. Let me talk to Alexander first, okay? Go play with your blocks, and we'll leave in a few minutes. Once Ethan was occupied, she turned to Alexander. Did you mean it? About staying? Every word. But your apartment, your life, everything you've built, means nothing compared to this. To you and him. I'll keep the penthouse for now, use it as an office if needed, but I want to be here. Want to wake up with you both. Want to be part of every moment. He took her hands. I want us to be a family, Evelyn. Real and messy and imperfect, and ours. I want that too, she whispered. So much. But I'm still scared. Of what? Of this being too good. Of waking up and finding out it was all a dream. She stopped, struggling for words. I've survived for so long by not hoping for too much. And now you're offering me everything I didn't dare want. It's overwhelming. Then we take it slow. One day at a time. No pressure. No expectations beyond showing up for each other. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we've been complicating it. She laughed softly. When did you become an optimist? When I found you. The transition wasn't seamless. Alexander had spent 4 decades living alone, and suddenly he was navigating the chaos of a 4-year-old's schedule. The first week he woke to Ethan jumping on the bed at 6 a.m., got marker on a $2,000 shirt because he forgot to change before craft time. Learned that bedtime took an hour minimum and involved negotiations that would put his board meetings to shame. But he also learned what it meant to matter to someone beyond his bank account. To have Ethan race to the door when he came home, shouting, "Daddy!" with pure joy. To catch Evelyn watching him read bedtime stories with an expression that made his chest tight. To belong somewhere in a way he never had before. 2 months after moving in, Alexander stood in the Queen's apartment that had become home and made a phone call that would change everything again. Richard, I need you to draw up papers. What kind of papers? The kind that make me legally recognized as Ethan's father. Adoption papers, custody agreements, whatever it takes. And while you're at it, he looked at Evelyn, who was folding laundry on the couch. Research marriage requirements in New York. I have a question I need to ask. Jesus, Alex, you don't do anything halfway, do you? Not anymore. The formal adoption process took 3 months and included DNA testing that confirmed what Alexander already knew in his bones. The judge who presided over the final hearing was a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. "Mr. Wolf," she said, reviewing the paperwork, "you're a wealthy man seeking to adopt a child you only discovered 8 months ago. Some might question your motives." "Then they should talk to him," Alexander said steadily. "Ask him if I show up, if I keep my promises, if I love him. Everything else is just noise." The judge looked at Ethan, who sat between Alexander and Evelyn wearing his nicest outfit and trying to sit still. "Young man, do you want Mr. Wolf to be your legal father?" "He already is my father," Ethan said with 4-year-old certainty. "But yeah, I want the paper to say so too, so everyone knows." The judge's stern expression cracked into a smile. "Petition granted. Congratulations, Mr. Wolf. You're officially a father." They celebrated at Ethan's favorite pizza place, the child wearing his Adoption Day sticker with pride and telling everyone who'd listen that he'd just gotten a daddy officially. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Alexander found Evelyn on the small balcony that overlooked the street. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "More than okay. I can't believe this is real, that we're here, that you're his father legally and officially and permanently. Believe it, because I'm about to make it even more real." He turned her to face him and dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Alexander, let me say this before I lose my nerve." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond solitaire, elegant but not ostentatious, chosen specifically because he knew she'd refuse anything flashy. "Evelyn Carter, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You took an impossible situation and turned it into something beautiful. You raised an incredible son alone when you should have had help. You survived when everything was stacked against you. And somehow, impossibly, you let me into your life even though I gave you every reason not to." Tears were already streaming down her face. "Alexander, I love you. Love everything about you, your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you never give up even when you should. Love the way you love our son. Love the way you've changed my entire world without even trying. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you'll never have to survive alone again. So," he took a breath. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and stood, catching her as she launched herself at him. They kissed while the city hummed below and the future stretched out before them, full of promise. "Daddy?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway. "Why is Mama crying? Is she sad?" They broke apart, both laughing. "Happy tears, baby," Evelyn said. "The best kind." "Did Alexander ask you to marry him? Because I told him he should. I said you'd say yes." Alexander looked at his son with surprise. "You did?" "Yeah, last week when we were at the park. I said Mama loves you even though she tries to hide it sometimes. And you love her. So you should get married so we can be a forever family." He climbed between them on the bench. "Did I ruin the surprise?" "No," Evelyn said, pulling him close. "You made it even better." They sat together on the small balcony, a family officially and completely. Alexander felt something settle in his chest that had been restless his entire life. This was it. This was what mattered. Not empires or wealth or power, but this moment right here with the two people who'd somehow become his entire world. The wedding was small and simple, held in the Queen's apartment with just a handful of people who mattered. Richard served as best man, Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony, and Ethan took his role as ring bearer with intense seriousness. Evelyn wore a simple dress that cost $200 and looked more beautiful than any designer gown. Alexander wore a suit but skipped the tie because Ethan had declared ties too fancy for a family party. David drove them to a small bed and breakfast upstate for a 2-night honeymoon while Mrs. Chen watched Ethan. It was Alexander's first real vacation in 15 years. "We should probably talk about the future," Evelyn said on their first morning, curled against him while rain pattered on the windows. "About where we go from here." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your apartment is sitting empty. You're still running a billion-dollar company from a bedroom in Queens. Something has to give." "Nothing has to give. I'm fine where I am." "Alexander, She propped herself up on one elbow. Be honest. Are you really happy in that apartment? Or are you just making do? He considered the question seriously. I'm happy wherever you and Ethan are. The location doesn't matter. But what if we could find somewhere that worked better? Somewhere with space for you to work properly, but still felt like home? What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, just thinking about it. You've given up so much to be with us. Maybe we can find a middle ground, somewhere that works for all of us. They spent the rest of the honeymoon talking about possibilities, about what kind of home they wanted to build together, about schools for Ethan and office space for Alexander, and all the practical details of merging their vastly different lives. 2 months later, they found it. A brownstone in Brooklyn that needed work but had good bones. 4 bedrooms, a backyard for Ethan, and a top floor that could be converted into Alexander's home office. It was more than Evelyn had ever dreamed of having, and less than Alexander could easily afford, which made it perfect. Are you sure? Evelyn asked as they stood in the empty living room, Ethan running from room to room shouting about how big everything was. This is a lot of money. It's an investment in our family, in our future, and besides, he pulled her close. I've been thinking about Richard's suggestion, about stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the company, promoting the CFO to CEO and moving into more of a chairman role. Fewer hours, more flexibility, more time with you and Ethan. What, you do that? I already did. Announced it this morning, effective immediately. She stared at him. Alexander, your company is everything to you. Was everything, past tense. He cupped her face. You two are everything now. The company is just something I own. You're who I am. They moved into the brownstone in the spring, 6 months after the adoption finalized. Alexander hired contractors who worked around their lives, understanding that this was a family home first and a construction project second. Ethan helped pick paint colors for his room, bright blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Evelyn created a reading nook in the corner of their bedroom. Alexander's office took shape on the top floor, with windows overlooking the neighborhood and photos of his family on every surface. The transformation wasn't just physical. Alexander learned to leave work at reasonable hours, to attend school events without checking his phone, to be present in ways he'd never managed before. Evelyn quit the restaurant and enrolled in online classes to finish her college degree, something she'd always wanted but never had time for. They built routines and traditions. Sunday morning pancakes, Wednesday movie nights, bedtime stories that all 3 of them participated in. One evening about a year after moving in, Alexander found Evelyn in the backyard watching Ethan play. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. What are you thinking about? How different everything is from 2 years ago. How I was drowning and alone and convinced that was just my life. And now, she gestured at the house, the yard, their son. Now I have all this. Have you. Have a life I didn't dare imagine. Any regrets? Only one. She turned in his arms. I regret not telling you about Ethan from the beginning. All those years he didn't have you. All that time you didn't know him. I can't get that back. No, Alexander agreed. But we have now. Have everything ahead of us. That's what matters. Daddy, Ethan called from his play structure. Watch this. He proceeded to demonstrate a trick on the slide that was decidedly not safe. Not so fast, buddy, Alexander called back. Your mother will kill me if you break something. I won't break anything. I'm careful. They watched their son play until the sun started setting and the air turned cool. Called him in for dinner, managed the chaos of bath time and teeth brushing and the eternal negotiations about how many more stories before sleep. Later, with Ethan finally down and the house quiet, Alexander stood in his office looking out at Brooklyn. The city lights glittered like promises, the sounds of life drifting up from the street. Everything he'd built over 42 years of ruthless ambition spread out before him, and none of it meant half as much as the ring on his finger, or the family sleeping downstairs, or the life they'd built together from the wreckage of his isolation and her desperation. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Coming to bed soon? Ethan wants you to check under his bed for monsters before you sleep. Apparently only daddies can see them properly. Alexander smiled and typed back. On my way. Can't let the monsters win. He took one last look at his city, his empire that no longer defined him, then headed downstairs to check for monsters and kiss his son goodnight and climb into bed beside the woman who'd given him everything he didn't know he needed. 2 years earlier, Alexander Wolf had been the loneliest successful man in New York, had built towers of wealth that meant nothing, had controlled everything except the emptiness inside him. Then a photograph had fallen from a waitress's apron, and his entire world had shifted. A single image of a child with his eyes had torn apart everything he thought he knew and rebuilt it into something infinitely better. Now he was a father, a husband, a man who left work early to attend school plays and learned to make pancakes and checked under beds for monsters. A man whose penthouse sat empty while he lived in a Brooklyn brownstone with a family that made him finally understand what the word home actually meant. The journey hadn't been smooth or perfect or anything like the fairy tales people told. It had been messy and complicated and filled with mistakes and second chances and learning to trust when trust felt impossible. But they'd figured it out together, built something real from the impossible collision of two separate worlds, proved that sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when everything fell apart. Alexander climbed into bed beside Evelyn and pulled her close, feeling her fit against him in the way things did when they were exactly right. Through the wall came the soft sound of Ethan's breathing, peaceful and secure. This was his empire now. This was what mattered. Not the towers he'd built or the wealth he'd accumulated, but these quiet moments in the dark with the people who taught him how to be human again. "I love you," he whispered into Evelyn's hair. "I love you too," she murmured back, already half asleep. "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding us. For staying. For being everything we needed. Thank you for letting me. For taking a chance on a man who had no idea what he was doing." She laughed softly. "You still have no idea what you're doing half the time." "No," he agreed. "But I'm figuring it out. We're figuring it out. Together. Together." And in the morning, Alexander would wake to his son jumping on the bed demanding pancakes, would stumble into the kitchen with messy hair and rumpled pajamas and attempt breakfast while Ethan provided enthusiastic but questionable guidance, would catch Evelyn's eye over their son's head and see his entire life reflected back at him in her smile. Would know, with absolute certainty, that everything that had come before, every lonely night and empty success and moment of isolation, had been worth it to arrive at this. At them. At home. The photograph that started everything sat framed on the mantel now, beside newer photos that documented their life together. But Alexander barely needed to look at it anymore. The child in the picture was right down the hall, growing bigger every day, calling him daddy with unself-conscious joy. His son, his wife, his family, his home. Finally, after 43 years of searching without knowing what he was searching for, Alexander Wolf had found exactly where he belonged.